order. You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man.
Chelsea FC have apologised in person to one of their own ex-players, who they subjected to a gagging clause after he told them he was sexually abused by a coach at the club. Just last year, Gary Johnson was paid £50,000 to keep the assaults he suffered secret, but the club lifted the confidentiality agreement last week, apologising profusely. We'll talk to Gary Johnson in a moment about his meeting with the chairman of Chelsea yesterday. But first, more criticism of the Football Association for how it responded back then to allegations of sexual abuse. We've been speaking to a former youth player who was abused in the 1980s by a coach linked to Manchester City. The players told this programme the FA and the government reacted dismissively and arrogantly when his dad raised serious concerns about child safety in the game. Our reporter Jim Reid is here. Fill us in, Jim.
Well, this is a man called Ian Ackley. Now, he waived his right to anonymity way back in 1997 as an abuse victim to speak to a Channel 4 documentary about this abuse. He's waived it again to speak to us today. This documentary back in 1997 was very important. It was the first sort of substantial investigation into these allegations which have now become this major scandal. So in many ways, Ian Ackley was one of the first young players ever to come forward publicly and talk about this. And it was after that programme was broadcast, so this is back in January 97, that his father started writing letters to anyone and everyone who could do something about this. We've got copies of just some of them here. There were literally dozens and dozens and dozens, so to MPs, to government departments, and in particular to the Football Association, raising concerns not just about his son's case, but about the wider state of safety, child safety in football.
OK. And he was not impressed with the response?
No, not at all. I mean, sadly, Ian's dad passed away a couple of years ago, but you get a sense from these letters of the frustration that he was feeling. So in this one, for example, it says, he's talking about the FA, he says he thinks the FA, he thought the FA would be most anxious to tackle this problem, but in fact the organisation hardly bursts with concern for either matters past or future. Now, we talked to his son Ian, the man who was abused as a boy, about all this, about the response he felt both his father and his family received, not just from the Football Association, but from other organisations after this documentary went out and these letters were written.
I could use the term flat. It was non-committal. It was, in some organisations, went some way to recognising that there were issues out there, but it always alludes to the fact that it's somebody else's problem, you know, that someone can't do it, the FA can't do it because they're waiting for government legislation. Government legislation takes a long time to roll out and it's a complex matter, although they recognise these problems. And so pretty dismissive at best. There's nothing that relates to any time frames, any detail about actually what's going to be done. No collaboration, no insight as to what are your thoughts, where do you think that we might be able to make any changes. You know, no approach. It was very much they're working in isolation, giving you snippets of information to almost appease you so that at least you've got a response of some sort. And I think they thought that was adequate, that they were doing their job by just responding.
When you look back at some of those letters, is it fair to say the tone feels like you're being brushed off a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Very dismissive in that respect. Like I say, it's almost like, you know, we're dealing with it. It's not your business. We're the ones that know what we're doing. We'll tell you a little bit of where we're going, but that's about it. And I think that's very ignorant of those organisations to take that standpoint. No, they're not expected to be experts in child safeguarding. They are sporting people. So surely you look to the experts for advice. So to be dismissive of those outside showing concern and raising these points seems in itself very ignorant and not appropriate to the situation. I mean, we're talking about children, you know, people that need us to protect them. I don't think you can get more serious than that. Not only was I affected when I was abused, but when my dad Deborah Davis and the dispatches programme tried to bang this drum extremely loudly, we were ignored for the second time. And that was in 1997. We're now in 2016, almost 20 years later, banging the same drum that we were banging back then.
So these are some of the letters that we're talking about here, and this is just a small example. We were around Ian's house yesterday, and he has literally dozens and dozens and dozens of these, a huge pile.
And that's to the Home Office. I mean, there's one to the Right Honourable Michael Howard MP. There's a letter here that he had a copy of, which is from the then Chief Executive of the FA, Graham Kelly, which Graham Kelly has sent to Ian Ackley's father and to various other people, various secretaries of clubs in the FA, the Football League, the Premier League and so on. Dear Sirs, child protection. The protection of children is an issue which the Football Association sees as one of the utmost importance.
This is the kind of information and rhetoric that was coming out at the time. I mean, Ian's argument, as you heard there, is they were saying the right things, but actually he felt they were getting brushed off by the FA and everyone else. They weren't taking these complaints seriously. No dates were being given, not enough was actually being done.
Now, more claims about the FA, this time about criminal record checks.
And this goes to what Ian was just saying. So criminal records checks is a really interesting issue. We've been speaking to people, other people, who say the FA was far too slow to bring these in for people working with children back around this time, around the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s. Now, these checks, Victoria, don't just include information about convictions. They can include, it's called soft intelligence. So this is if a local police force has a concern about someone, but it might not have gone as far as court and a conviction.
OK, but this is a relatively new measure.
In a way, I mean, before 2002, believe it or not, it was only really schools, local authorities, other so-called statutory organisations that could put these in place. But there was a sort of way round it at the time. So we've learned back in 1994, there was a pilot project set up by the Home Office that did allow some children's charities to access this information, both for their own staff, to make sure their own staff were compliant, but also on behalf of other people. Now, we've been speaking to one of these charities involved back then in the pilot, a group called Fair Play for Children. And they say around this time, this documentary had gone out, it was the late 90s, they were being contacted by local youth leagues saying, look, can you check the coaches, the referees, the people like that we've got working with us? Now, they did, on this occasion, this Bristol Youth League, check 50 people, 49 were fine. One, the police had concerns about. This person was then barred from this club, removed from this club, and a year and a half later, he was convicted of child sex offences. So this charity is saying, look, we had a system that was working back then and proven to work back then.
But it wasn't extended.
Well, this is the issue. So the charity said they tried to extend it. They wrote to the FA, we've seen letters, but they felt they were knocked back and knocked back. In fact, the person in charge of this charity even claims the FA actively tried to block other youth clubs and other leagues from taking part in this project.
It was the FA and its principal person who I was warned had shut us down and was doing all they could to keep people away. And my attitude was this. It was no reason other than we were on their patch. And I can't understand that. You can't do that with child protection. You have to share. When I wrote to their chief executive, I got the bum's rush of an answer through their legal department. Some bland piece of nonsense. And that was it. We should have had a relationship with the FA which would have done both parties no end of good. But more importantly, of course, it's the kids who come first, and they haven't here. They have not come first. And this is what we learned from other scandals, a particular sporting scandal in America with the Penn State University. That's what we learned. The kids did not come first. It was the reputation of the organisation or its place, its position. And that's what I felt. Too much jobs worth going on and not enough actually concern for the kids.
And what did the FA say about all
Well,
that?
at the moment they say, look, they don't feel it's right to comment on every allegation because there is this independent investigation with a QC that they put in place to deal with allegations of abuse and how the FA responded. They did eventually bring in these compulsory checks for people working with children, but not until 2003. And we think some of them weren't even going until 2007. So you think about it, that's 10 years after Mr. Ackley and his son were raising concerns, as you heard in that report.
Thank you very much, Jim. Jim Reid reporting. Well, let's now talk to ex-Chelsea player Gary Johnson about the club paying him £50,000 to keep his sexual abuse ordeal a secret. The 57-year-old went to the club to tell them about the abuse he suffered at the hands of then Chief Scout Eddie Heath. He was Chief Scout from 1968 to 1979 and who died in the 80s. Chelsea paid Mr Johnson that money and included in the agreement a confidentiality clause, meaning Mr Johnson had to keep quiet about what happened to him. Yesterday, Chelsea board members finally met Mr Johnson face to face. Gary Johnson says he was assaulted by Heath hundreds of times from the age of 13. He's waived his right to anonymity now to speak to us alongside his wife, Maurice. Thank you both very much for coming on the programme. Good of you to be here. What happened in the meeting with the chairman of Chelsea yesterday?
Very humble. Basically, apologising for the way they handled it, and admitted that we maybe should have met 18 months ago.
Apologising for the way they handled it rather than the abuse that you endured?
Also the abuse that I'd suffered with the club. I pointed out I've got nothing against the new regime, you know, what happened I appreciate was years ago. And that very, very profusely sorry to me and my wife for the suffering we've gone through. It also admitted there was mistakes in the jargon between solicitors and insurance papers and such.
Leading to the gagging clause?
Leading to the gagging clause, which they thought it was for my benefit. And that's
what they told you yesterday?
That's what they told me yesterday, yes.
Mutual agreement.
A mutual, they call it a mutual agreement, but to me it wasn't. I hadn't agreed to that order.
Was that apology enough?
Is an apology enough? Probably too little, too late. We just have to see it as it is. An apology is an apology, and right now I'll take that. I'll take that.
Do you know? I mean, when you signed that confidentiality agreement, what were you thinking when they wanted you to keep quiet about it, about the abuse you'd suffered?
With the document, I was basically pushed into a corner. The wordings from the solicitors and the insurance companies, and it was basically stating the fact that there's the money, but to have the money, you have to sign this. So I signed it. Yeah, I agreed with my solicitor to say, okay, if that's what they want, that's what they, that's what they can have.
And do you think £50,000 from a club worth billions, paying some of its players over £100,000 a week, is enough?
Nowhere near for the pain and suffering. No, definitely not.
What would have been a more appropriate sum, do you think?
Couldn't put a figure on it.
Couldn't really put a figure on it. I wasn't looking that way anyway at the beginning. It just happened. So you can't put a noughts on anything. It's not going to bring anything back.
Did the subject of money come up yesterday?
No.
Do you think they should give you more?
Yes, to build a better life for me and my wife, to get back to normality. Yes, personally I do.
Would it make a difference to you, Maurice, if they gave you some more?
It enabled Gary to take life a little bit easier, and give us a little bit of retirement, I suppose, and a bit of peace, and the help that he needs, to give him time to get the help he needs. He's been too busy looking after me over the last 18 months, and previous to that, the children. But, yeah, it would make a huge difference to our life. But it's not what this is all about. It is the suffering. Gary has really suffered, and not just Gary, but I should imagine many of the other families involved in this are suffering even as we speak now.
The whole of your time together, for as long as you've known Gary, he has been suffering the impact of what happened to him as a boy.
Yes, oh, without doubt.
Give us an insight into
Well,
how Gary has been over the decades.
It started when he was 28, and he actually told me, and then I noticed early on in the relationship that Gary's depression was quite dark, and his anger was quite quick. I put it down to, because he was still playing football in that era that we was together at the beginning, and I put it down to the football, and he was also doing the knowledge. So I put it down to just pressure, but as time got on, it got worse, and it's got so worse over the last few years that in 1 year, when you added up the amount of time that he didn't actually speak to me personally, it was about 5 months in 1 year, he never spoke to me. It would be 3 months and then another 4 weeks where he'd sort of turn on a sixpence, get angry, and then go into this deep black depression. And it was only when he was diagnosed did I fully understand what was causing it, because I thought he had bipolar, he was a manic depressive, didn't sort of connect, join the dots up really to connect what was causing his behaviour. And it's not gone now. He's still prone to this, even this morning, when he knows when it's coming up, when he's got to talk about things.
How do you reflect on what happened to you as a boy, Gary?
Oh, took my youth away, took my childhood away, without a doubt, and that's never going to come back. And as Marissa's saying, they label everything today, whereas you don't understand. You can't understand what you're going through and why you're going through. The tears, and you wake up one day and you're crying, you're on your own, and you can't understand why that is.
But you've actually been diagnosed, I think, with PTSD, haven't you?
Yes, I have, which come as quite a shock, actually. It's sort of like, as I say, they put a label on why this was happening, and getting to understand a little bit better. It's not going to be overnight. It's going to need some counselling. So let's just get this start periods out of the way and move forward.
Do you think other clubs could have paid other former players to keep quiet about sexual abuse that they experienced?
There could be some truth in them statements, without a doubt.
And do you think there are yet more players still to come out and speak publicly?
Most definitely. Probably in the hundreds.
Really?
Low hundreds, I would have thought. Probably even more, without a doubt. There's a lot now in the background that don't want to come forward, which I obviously can understand that. But the guys that have come forward opened all this up. Very brave guys to having to live with this. Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely.
I wonder what you think of our story today and also yesterday. Yesterday we reported that a mum raised concerns decades ago. Today we're reporting that the dad of an abused player wrote to all sorts of people, the FA, government departments, local MPs, and he felt he was dismissed effectively.
You was up against a brick wall. You really was up against a brick wall. What Gary went through from 2013, even with the police involved, it was a brick wall. No one was taking any notice. They didn't want to believe that sexual abuse was going on in any club. Not even just the football clubs, boys' clubs. No one wanted to know. It was being brushed under the carpet. It was too big a thing to deal with.
Is that what you think, Gary?
Yeah, even right now, even to, with this clause with, and I said to the three guys, the three board members yesterday, it just felt again, just brush it under the carpet.
Why do you feel that now? That's really interesting because, as you know, the FA say they're carrying out their own internal review. They say they are committed to publishing that, subject to legal restrictions. Chelsea are carrying out their own internal investigation. Crew are, a number of other clubs are. Why do you still feel they don't really want to know?
because we've hit a brick wall. I've had it for 40 years, hit a brick wall, and the last 3 years, again, people, you know, disbelieving. You know, the FA stating now that they're investigating. They've changed the QC, but they need to start now. Last week, maybe the week before, they need to get to grips of it now.
Do you trust the FA to get to the bottom of this?
No.
Why do you say that?
Because they're not acting on it straight as we speak. You know, the guys came out from Crewe last week. It just seems they're waiting maybe for another story to break somewhere else in the country that they can maybe brush it under the carpet and it will go away. You know, we need help here. You know, the guys that have come out and the guys that haven't come out and admitted that they've been abused, we need help from now, from last week, the week before, and it just doesn't seem to be coming forward. I've had no contact
From?
The FA, the police, and the police requested my details last week, from Chelsea last week, which I gave my permission because now it's all out in the open. You know, I appreciate these things take time, but we're at present right now. It's now 2 weeks, but as you heard there, 1997, nothing changes. Until I see any evidence that it does, then maybe we can all start believing.
Okay. Well, I'm very grateful for you coming on our programme. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for your time this morning. If you have been affected by some of the issues we've been talking about with Gary Johnson, you can find a list of helplines at the BBC Action Line. Go to bbc.co.uk/Action Line.